Oliver Reeves needed only 3 seconds to hear the sound that meant a man could die. He stood in his stained gray work shirt at the edge of the staging floor at Hartwell Velocity Systems, his hands still smelling of warm metal, and waited until the engine cycled one more time before stepping toward the woman in the red dress. Vivian Hartwell, the chief executive officer of one of Detroit's most ambitious performance brands, was minutes away from walking onto a stage she had spent 2 years building. Behind Oliver, his 6-year-old daughter Matilda sat quietly on a folding chair, holding a faded blue toy car against her chest. Oliver kept his voice low. He told the chief executive that if the new hybrid prototype ran the acceleration demonstration in front of the investors, the drivetrain would shut itself down on the stage. She glanced at his work shirt. She glanced at the small girl behind him. Then she said, in a tone meant to be heard, that she did not place the future of her company in the hands of a mechanic who brought his daughter to work. 10 minutes later, the engine died in front of every investor. The trade show floor inside Hartwell Velocity Systems had been built to look like the future. Cool blue lighting washed across the concrete. A wall-sized screen showed a slow rotation of the new hybrid prototype, the car that had taken 4 years, and most of the company's reputation to build. Rows of leather seats faced the stage, front row reserved for institutional investors, rear for industry press and senior engineers. Every detail suggested that Hartwell could still build the kind of machines the old American performance world used to build, only cleaner. In the staging bay behind the curtain, Oliver Reeves performed the final pre-show check. He did not stand near the lights. He stood near the engine bay, sleeves pushed up, a streak of grease along his forearm. His boots were worn through at the toe. 2 rows of polished Oxfords passed him in the corridor without seeing him. In the corner near the staff lounge, Matilda watched her father with the patience only a child raised by one parent ever learns. The engine cycled, and Oliver heard it. The sound was small. It did not register on the diagnostic board. It existed only in the half-second of transition between the electric motor and the high-output gasoline engine. To anyone else, it sounded like a soft, dry tick. To Oliver, it sounded like the voice a piece of metal uses when pulled in 2 directions at once. He asked the technician to run the cycle again. The man did, with some impatience. The tick was there a second time. Oliver placed his palm on the subframe near the auxiliary drivetrain and closed his eyes. He felt the vibration travel through the steel. He understood at once. The mounting point of the harmonic damper had drifted, perhaps by less than 2 millimeters, under the combined load of heat and torque. A simulation could not see it. A sensor would not flag it. But when the car ran the acceleration sequence, the drivetrain protection system would read the small vibration as a fault and cut power. He reported the issue to Corbin Maddox, head of the engineering team. Corbin was 46 years old, gifted, and afraid of looking foolish. He listened with arms folded. He told Oliver every reading on the board was green, and to stop turning a personal feeling into a crisis. Oliver answered that a green reading did not mean the mechanical system was healthy. If the car ran the acceleration cycle, it would shut down on the stage. Corbin's voice rose. He told Oliver to stand aside. Oliver looked at his daughter, who had heard the rising voice and was watching him with concern. He thought about the cost of staying silent. He chose to find Vivian Hartwell himself. The morning had begun in a quiet apartment in a working-class corner of suburban Detroit. The kitchen was neat in the way of a household that had learned to keep itself in order without help. A school calendar was taped to the refrigerator. A small framed photograph of a woman stood on a shelf above the table, beside a dried sprig from a plant that had once been hers. Oliver had not moved either object in 3 years. He cut Matilda's bread into small pieces, checked her backpack, retied her laces. She asked if he would be at her school recital the following week. He smiled and told her yes. When she turned away, he looked at his work calendar and tried to figure out which of his appointments he could move. The babysitter called shortly after. Her own child had a fever. Oliver said he understood. He stood for a moment in the kitchen with his hand on the back of a chair. He could not leave Matilda at home alone. He could not call out from a contract shift on the day of the largest demonstration the company had ever scheduled. Matilda came back into the kitchen carrying her toy car. She looked up at him and said she could sit still and would not bother anyone. It was a small, reasonable sentence. It also broke a piece of him, because no 6-year-old should have already learned to make herself smaller for a parent's convenience. He drove her to the plant. He told her to stay in the staff lounge, away from the open bays, and to keep the toy car in her lap. The car had belonged to her mother, a small object pulled from a glove compartment after the funeral. In the 3 years since, it had become a portable promise that the woman who had loved them both was still in the room. In the shop, Oliver was respected by people whose respect was hard to earn. Archie Miller, 55 and missing the tip of one finger, watched Oliver guide his daughter to the lounge and asked whether the babysitter had canceled. Oliver nodded. Archie said he would keep an eye on the girl. He had once watched Oliver listen to an idling engine for 10 seconds and announced that a ground strap was loose where the senior engineers had not thought to check. When Archie asked where he had learned what he knew, Oliver had answered that he had learned it in places he no longer wanted to visit. Oliver did not want to be noticed. He wanted to finish his shift, collect his pay, drive his daughter home, and continue the slow business of building a life small enough to hold. The world he had once moved through, full of patent meetings and brilliant people, had cost him too many evenings with the woman he loved. After she died, he had not gone back. He took contract work because it let him be a father first. Vivian Hartwell did not enter the morning as a simple villain. She entered as a young woman living in the long shadow of a dead man. Her father had founded Hartwell Velocity Systems in a small garage on the outskirts of Detroit and built it, over 25 years, into one of the most respected performance brands in the country. When he died, Vivian inherited the office, the staff, the contracts, and the silent skepticism of a board that still saw her as a daughter handed something, rather than an executive who had earned it. The new hybrid prototype was her answer. 2 years of meetings, redesigns, carefully rehearsed presentations to investors who needed to be reminded that Hartwell still mattered. The car was meant to combine speed, efficiency, and the kind of driving feel the brand had been known for. It was the proof, public and final, that Vivian could lead the company her father had built. In the glass conference room above the main floor, she stood before numbers that would have unsettled anyone. Funding round of $300 million. The cost of research. The cost of pre-production. The cost of a delay no one would forgive. Henry Ashford, the chairman of the board, told her the investors would not accept another postponement. If today went poorly, the board would consider a change in leadership. She listened. She did not let her face move. She straightened her red dress in the reflection of the window. She knew her appearance drew attention. She also knew some men used it as a reason to take her less seriously. So she had built around herself an outer layer that did not waver. No hesitation. No softness. No opening to interrupt. Corbin Maddox came in to deliver his pre-launch briefing. Every system green. Every simulation passed. The only risk, he said, was allowing people without credentials to slow the schedule down. The line entered Vivian's mind quietly and stayed there. It would shape the worst decision she would make that year. By the time the prototype was rolled into the staging area, the engineering team was moving with the choreography of a launch they had rehearsed many times. Someone monitored battery temperature. Someone monitored fuel line pressure. The board lit up green at every station. Nothing on any monitor suggested anything in the world was wrong. Oliver did not only watch the board. He listened. There was a moment, lasting less than a single second, in which the system shifted from electric to gasoline power. In that moment, the engine made a small, dry sound, tight and hard, like a piece of metal arguing with itself. He asked the technician to run the cycle again. The technician sighed and complied. The same sound emerged the second time. Oliver knelt beside the subframe, set his palm against the metal near the auxiliary drivetrain, and closed his eyes for a few seconds. He understood the geometry of the problem before he had finished a full breath. If the issue were electronic, the engine note would have stayed smooth. If it were software, it would have appeared in a different cycle. What he was hearing was mechanical, coming from the small assembly built to absorb torque shock when the gasoline engine took over. The damper's mounting point had been calculated correctly on paper. In real conditions, heat and torque had pulled the contact surfaces less than 2 millimeters out of true. A tiny number. Enough. Oliver had seen this kind of failure before. Years earlier, he had watched a racing prototype lose a final because of a similar resonance, a problem so small, the simulation never noticed it, and so loud the protection system read it as catastrophic. Mechanical systems did not always lie. Sometimes they whispered. The job of a real mechanic was to hear the whisper. He approached Corbin first, calmly, without an audience. He suggested a 5-minute hold, a thin shim, retorquing the mounting point, and reducing the initial load during the first transition. Corbin's face hardened. He told Oliver an entire engineering team had spent 4 years on this car and that Oliver was suggesting their work was inferior to his ear. Oliver answered that the car did not care which person held which title. The car only responded to real force. Corbin sent him back to the auxiliary station. Oliver looked at his daughter through the glass. She was watching him with the kind of trust a child only loses once. He could not, he realized, teach her honesty by going quiet in front of something that was about to hurt people. So he walked to find Vivian Hartwell. He found her near the side of the stage, surrounded. Henry Ashford stood close on her right. Corbin Maddox arrived at her left. 2 senior investors had come back to wish her luck. A small internal media team was filming the pre-show. Every camera would later be reviewed. Every word would later be remembered. Oliver kept his voice low. He told her he needed her to delay the acceleration portion of the demonstration. He asked for 5 minutes. She glanced at her watch and asked why. He told her the car had a resonance issue in the auxiliary drivetrain, and that under full load the protection system would cut power. The warning lights would not appear until after the transition, and by then the demonstration would be ruined. Corbin stepped in. He said, in front of everyone, that this man had already been warned, and that this was nothing more than the speculation of a contract worker. The phrase was chosen with precision. It placed Oliver on a lower step than everyone in the circle. Vivian heard it. She looked at the grease on Oliver's forearm. She looked at the wear pattern on his boots. She looked, last, at Matilda in the corridor behind him with her toy car held tight against her chest. The image did not become an image of devotion in Vivian's mind. It became an image of unprofessional disorder. She told him that today was not a day for theatrics. He told her evenly that he was trying to prevent theatrics. The exchange was small. The silence around it was not. 2 of the investors had stopped speaking. The camera was still rolling. Vivian felt her control of the room had just been threatened by a man wearing a stained work shirt. So she chose the cleanest cut available to her. She said, at a volume that carried, that she did not place the future of her company in the hands of a mechanic who brought his daughter to work. The room did not exactly go quiet. It went tight. Matilda heard. She had heard worse insults at school, but never a stranger speaking to her father in a voice meant to lower him. She lowered her face into the toy car. Oliver did not answer back. He did not raise his voice. He did not visibly flinch. He looked briefly at his daughter. He saw her lower lip move. He decided, in that instant, that whatever else happened today, his daughter would not see her father shrink in front of her. Vivian gestured to the security officer at the side of the stage. The officer was not rough. He simply walked at the speed that signaled to everyone in the corridor that the man in the gray work shirt no longer belonged in the building. A few floor staff lowered their heads. Archie Miller, watching from the back of the bay, closed his hand into a fist that he did not raise. Oliver knelt in front of Matilda. He told her, in a voice meant only for her, that she had not done anything wrong. She asked if she had been the reason he had been yelled at. He answered that she had never once been the reason he had been ashamed of anything, and that she was the reason he kept trying to do what was right. He stood, took her hand, and turned to leave. Before he stepped out, he looked back at Vivian. He said, simply, that he hoped he was wrong. Vivian walked onto the stage to the sound of welcoming applause. Whatever crack had appeared in her control during the exchange backstage, she had sealed it before her foot touched the lights. Under the cool stage glow, she looked composed, polished, in command. The red dress framed her against the pale floor. The applause rose and steadied. A few investors leaned forward. The screen behind her showed the slow rotation of the prototype. She began with her father. She said his name without sentimentality. She told the story of the small garage, the early years, the loyal customers who had never stopped believing the brand could move forward. She said performance was no longer only about speed. It was about discipline, precision, the kind of clean American engineering that did not need to apologize. The investors began to nod. Henry Ashford allowed his shoulders to relax for the first time all morning. Backstage, Corbin signaled the engineering team to proceed. He did not allow anyone to repeat what Oliver had said. To pause now would be to admit, in front of his own team, that he had ignored a warning. He had spent his career not being the man who paused. He chose pride. In the rear corridor, Oliver was guiding his daughter toward the parking lot. He had no intention of staying. But when the muffled sound of the demonstration engine reached him through the wall, he stopped walking. The note was different now. In the closed staging bay, the resonance had been small. In the wide acoustics of the showroom stage, it would be amplified. He stood very still and listened. Matilda looked up and asked whether the car was really going to break. Oliver said slowly that he hoped not. She asked whether the woman would apologize if it did. He told her it did not matter. What mattered was that no one got hurt. Inside, the prototype rolled into position at the center of the stage. The black covering slid away under controlled motion. The body of the car caught the lights. A few investors raised cameras to capture the moment. Vivian announced that what they were about to see represented the largest single step in the history of the Hartwell brand. Corbin stood at the control board behind the stage, eyes flicking across green readings in a steady, reassuring line. It looked, for that one suspended minute, exactly the way Vivian had imagined it for 2 years. Vivian closed her remarks with a sentence she had rehearsed for weeks. She welcomed the room to the future of performance. The driver engaged the demonstration sequence. The car moved out of stillness with the silent ease of the electric system. The first portion was perfect. The investors began to applaud. Vivian's smile became real for the first time that morning. Corbin allowed himself to exhale. Then the gasoline engine engaged for the acceleration sequence. The high-output system roared up through the transition with a sound that filled the room. The screen above the stage showed climbing speed, climbing torque, climbing efficiency. For 3 seconds, the demonstration was everything Hartwell had promised. Then the small dry tick became a sharp metallic shriek. The car jolted. The instrument display flooded with red. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. The drivetrain protection system engaged. The car lost forward power and rolled, helpless and silent, to the center of the stage. The screen above flashed a single line in white. Drivetrain protection shut down. The room did not gasp. The room went still in the way rooms only go still when something has gone wrong in front of money. It was a heavier silence than a scream. Vivian stood frozen at the side of the stage. Corbin lunged toward his laptop and began searching for codes that would not give him an answer. Engineers swarmed the engine bay, opened the hood, plugged in diagnostic cables, called instructions to one another in voices that lost their professional cool with every passing second. The data told them the system had protected itself. It did not tell them why. A senior investor stood up in the front row. He asked, with no warmth in his voice, whether this was a planned part of the demonstration. No one answered. Another investor said, more loudly, that if the car could not survive its own showcase, no one was going to write a check toward its production. A board member leaned toward Henry Ashford and said, very quietly, that they could not sign the funding round in this state. Vivian tried to recover the room. She said the engineering team was already addressing the issue. Her voice did not carry the way it had 5 minutes earlier. She looked at Corbin, expecting the answer he had spent his morning promising. He did not have one. He spoke about possible sensor faults, possible software issues, possible overactive protection thresholds. The investors did not want possibilities. They wanted certainty. In the rear corridor, Oliver heard the alarm. He did not move for a moment. Matilda looked up at him and understood, the way children do, that her father had been right. Oliver closed his eyes for half a second. There was no satisfaction on his face. He had not wanted to be right. He had only wanted to be heard. In the chaos that followed the shutdown, Matilda slipped away from the corridor. No one noticed at first. Engineers were bent over the engine. Investors were standing in the aisles. Vivian was trying, with diminishing success, to keep her voice at the frequency of someone in control. The cameras set up to capture a victory were now capturing a quiet, expensive disaster. A young assistant noticed the small girl approaching the technical barrier and moved to guide her away. Matilda did not resist. She only said, in a voice meant for one person but heard by several, that her father knew how to fix it. Her father had told them the car would break. Her father had heard the wrong sound. A nearby technician straightened up. He remembered, faintly, that the man in the gray work shirt had said something about the auxiliary drivetrain before the demonstration. Another technician confirmed it. Within a minute, the small fact moved across the staging area like quiet weather. Reeves had warned them. Reeves had named the failure mode. Henry Ashford heard it from a member of the engineering staff. He turned to Vivian. His voice was level and very low. He asked whether someone had warned her before the demonstration. Vivian did not answer. Corbin began to interject that it had only been a baseless guess. Henry stopped him with a single sentence. A baseless guess had just become the truth in front of every investor in the room. Matilda was still standing near the barrier. She looked at Vivian. She did not look angry. She looked sad in the simple way of children who have not yet learned how to hide their feelings. She said, very quietly, that the woman had made her father sad. Then she said more quietly that her father had not wanted the car to break anyway. The line did not strike Vivian as a critique from a stranger. It struck her in a place she had not allowed anyone to reach in years. She remembered the look on the girl's face 30 minutes earlier. She remembered the moment she had referred, in front of 200 people, to a child as evidence of unprofessionalism. She had not just been wrong about an engineering call. She had been wrong about a person. Henry turned to her and told her plainly to bring him back. Vivian understood that he was not speaking to an assistant. She had been the one who ordered Oliver out. She would have to be the one to ask him in. She removed her microphone, stepped down from the stage, and walked the length of the room. She walked past investors who no longer met her eyes. She walked past Corbin, who had nothing left to say. She walked past Matilda, who watched her go with the toy car still pressed against her chest. She found him in the rear parking lot. The wind had picked up. Oliver was holding the rear door of his old sedan open for his daughter. The car was small, dented, unmistakably worn. It looked nothing like the cars inside the building. It looked, in its way, more honest than they did. She called his name. He turned. He was not surprised. He did not look pleased. He did not say, "I told you so." The simple absence of cruelty in his face was, somehow, more difficult to face than any speech she had imagined on the walkover. She told him the car had shut down. He answered that he had heard. She stood for a few seconds, the wind catching the hem of her dress. Then she said she needed him to come back. He looked at her. His voice, when he spoke, was not bitter. It was honest. He asked her whether she needed him because she trusted him, or because the people she trusted no longer had answers. The question landed in a place Vivian did not have a defense for. 10 minutes earlier, she would have answered with anger. Now, after the engine had failed and the child had spoken, she did not have anger left. She told him evenly that the answer was both. The first thing she needed to say was that she had been wrong. She did not stop there. She told him she had been wrong to dismiss his warning, wrong to read his appearance as a measure of his worth, wrong, last, to speak about his daughter in front of a room full of strangers. Matilda stood at her father's side. She did not understand every word. She understood the tone. She understood that the woman who had spoken cruelly an hour earlier was now speaking like a person. Oliver asked her one more question. He asked whether if he came back inside he would be allowed to speak in front of the engineering team, or whether he would only be expected to fix the problem in silence so the failure could be quietly erased. The question was not pride. It was principle. Oliver did not need credit. He needed the truth to be respected. Vivian looked toward the building, where 200 people were waiting, then back at him. She told him he would speak in front of all of them, and she would listen. Oliver crouched until he was eye to eye with his daughter and asked if she would be all right if he went back inside for a little while. Matilda nodded. She told him to go help them. Then she added that she did not want the woman to be unkind to him again. Oliver placed his hand on her shoulder. He told her that no one could make him smaller as long as he knew he was doing what was right. He stood. He turned to Vivian. He told her he would help, but until he had checked the drivetrain himself, no one was to touch the car. She agreed. For the first time, she walked behind him. He stepped back into the showroom and the room shifted. The same people who had watched him removed an hour earlier now watched him return as the only person who could end their crisis. A few engineers avoided his eyes. A few did not. Archie Miller, at the edge of the bay, gave him a small, almost invisible nod, as if to say the right thing had finally happened, even if it had taken a disaster. Corbin tried to retain a piece of his authority. He said the engineering team was still working on it. Henry Ashford cut him off. He told him he had already had his chance, and that Mr. Reeves was now going to speak. Oliver did not gloat. He walked to the prototype and began. He asked for the system to be powered down, the auxiliary subsystems isolated, the hood opened, the under tray removed. He asked for 3 pieces of information. The temperature of the drivetrain at the moment of shutdown, the timing of the transition from electric to gasoline, the protection code that had triggered. The engineers fed him the data. He read it quickly. He told the room calmly that the protection code had appeared before any sensor had recorded an overload. That meant the system had not been responding to a real failure. It had been responding to vibration. He placed his hand on the subframe. He told them the vibration was originating in the auxiliary drivetrain, where the harmonic damper's mounting point was drifting under heat load. Corbin objected that the damper had been simulated hundreds of times. Oliver answered that simulations could not hear what real metal sounded like once it was warm. The line did not humiliate Corbin. It only ended the argument. He ran a low-power test cycle. The familiar dry tick appeared at the transition. He pointed to the spot under the cover. The problem was not in the sensors and not in the software. The mechanical system was speaking first. He asked for a thin shim, an alignment tool, a torque wrench, and a portable vibration meter. A junior engineer asked how long the repair would take. Oliver answered, without sarcasm, that if no one in the room insisted on guessing wrong for him, 12 minutes would be enough. The repair itself was quietly satisfying. He removed the mounting point. He inserted the shim. He adjusted the torque to the figure he wanted, then asked the team to revise the order in which the system applied load during the transition cycle. He asked for the protection threshold to be temporarily widened so the system would not generate a false shutdown during the verification run. He explained each step out loud, so anyone in the room with the will to learn could follow along. When the engine cycled again, the dry tick was gone. The transition between electric and gasoline ran smooth. The car had told them, in its own language, that the contract worker had been right. Vivian stood near the rear of the bay. Her face moved through a sequence of expressions she had not allowed herself in years. She had begun the morning as a chief executive who could not afford a single mistake. She was watching now, the man she had publicly dismissed quietly, correct the error that had nearly ended her company. Oliver said only that the car could now be run again, but that the acceleration sequence should not be pushed to maximum on the first attempt. He suggested 2 moderate transitions before any hard load was applied. Henry said simply that the team would do it Mr. Reeves's way. Just before the second test, Henry Ashford stepped close to Oliver. His face was thoughtful. He asked him where he had learned to hear engines the way he heard them. Oliver hesitated. He had spent 3 years quietly avoiding this conversation. He was about to answer when a young engineer in the data section pulled up the original architectural files for the drivetrain platform the prototype was built upon. 3 years earlier, Hartwell had licensed that architecture from an independent group of engineers. The record had never been important to anyone in the building, until now. The file appeared on the central screen. Several heads turned toward it. At the bottom corner of the design document, on the line reserved for the lead architect, was a name in plain print: Oliver Reeves, lead mechanical architect. The room cooled in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Corbin's face went pale. Vivian looked at the screen, then at Oliver, then back at the screen. Henry Ashford rose to his feet. One investor leaned toward another and said quietly that the man in the work shirt had designed the platform. Oliver did not look pleased. He looked tired. He had not wanted to be revealed. He answered briefly. Years earlier, he had been part of a small group that designed high-performance drivetrain architectures for racing and hybrid applications. The platform Hartwell now used had been part of that work. When his wife became seriously ill, he had stepped away. After she died, he had not been willing to go back. He had taken contract work because it let him pick his daughter up from school. The room did not respond with applause. It responded with silence. It was no longer the silence of a crisis. It was the silence of 200 people learning, all at once, that the man they had watched be removed from a building had built the bones of the very car they were sitting in front of. Vivian walked back onto the stage. This time she did not stand the way she had at the start of the morning. She held the microphone the way someone holds something heavier than the object itself. Her voice was not unsteady, but it was no longer perfectly polished. She told the room she had made that morning a mistake a chief executive was not allowed to make. She had judged a man by his clothing, his title, his personal circumstances. She had ignored the truth because it had come from a person she had not wanted to hear. She turned to Oliver. She told him she was sorry. She did not apologize for the failed engine. She apologized for taking his dignity in front of his daughter. The prototype was started for the second test. The transitions ran smoothly. The driver moved up through the load steps in the order Oliver had recommended. The sound of the engine rose without strain. The screen above the stage showed clean, climbing numbers. The drivetrain held. The car completed the demonstration cycle. The applause that followed was unusual. Some of it was for the technology. Some was for the relief. The most thoughtful part, was for the man in the gray work shirt who had been told, an hour earlier, that he was not qualified to stand in the room. Henry Ashford thanked Oliver publicly and asked that his safety warning be entered into the official record of the demonstration. He directed that the company's review process be re-examined and that engineering judgments would no longer be made in a way that excluded technicians from the floor. Corbin Maddox accepted the change. He became a man who would have to live, professionally, with what his pride had cost. Vivian offered Oliver a position as senior technical advisor for Hartwell Velocity Systems. He did not accept on the spot in the manner of a man receiving a gift. He told her plainly that if he were to stay, every safety warning offered in the building, whether from a senior engineer, a contractor, or a new hire on the floor, would have to be entered into the record and reviewed. He said engines did not care about job titles. The truth did not, either. She accepted his terms without hesitation. Matilda came through the crowd and folded herself into her father's side. She held the toy car against her ribs. She looked up at him and asked whether the people in the room now knew that he was more than just a mechanic. Oliver knelt until he was at her height. He told her that being a mechanic was already a thing worth being proud of. What the people in the room had learned today, he said more quietly, was something different. They had learned that listening was supposed to come before judging. A few steps away, Vivian watched them. The hard line of her face had softened. She did not look at Oliver as a contract worker, nor as a hidden expert. She looked at him the way she might look at a man who had been pushed off a stage and still come back to keep the room from falling. Whatever else might happen between them, that look would matter more, in the long run, than any words spoken that morning. There are people who do not need fine clothing to become the most important person in a room. There are mornings on which the man removed from the stage turns out to be the only person who can save the show. And sometimes the lesson, when it finally arrives, comes through the small voice of a 6-year-old girl holding a faded blue car that once belonged to her mother.